What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a deep look at the minimap as well as suppressed and unsuppressed fire in XDefiant. Since this is a topic that a lot of people have asked me about, a lot of people are curious about it, myself included, and basically we're just wondering, is it worthwhile to use suppressors, or is it basically just a waste of an attachment that isn't going to be helping you all that much? So I decided to dive deep and do some testing, and of course I wanted to share the results with you guys today. And the first thing to go over here is our minimap coverage. How much range does our minimap have? And after a bunch of testing and painstaking measurements, I found the base minimap radius to be 22.5 meters. And this will apply to all of the factions aside from Echelon. The Echelon faction actually gets an additional hidden passive, and that is a 1.3 times larger minimap radius. So this radius, as far as I can tell, is 29.25 meters. It's possible that's rounded right up to 30 meters, but I believe it's actually a 1.3 times multiplier, which brings it up to 29.25. In either case, that is a huge additional upside to using the Echelon faction. You get a noticeably larger minimap coverage, so you can see more of the map at any given time. In fact, on Arena, when using Echelon, if you're roughly centralized on the map, you can see almost all of the map with your minimap coverage, whereas the other factions aren't even close. Now, Arena might not be the best map to look at since it is the smallest map in the game currently, so let's look at a more medium-sized map, Pueblito. You can see how much of the map your minimap will cover here, and then finally, let's have a look at Showtime, which is the map that you're seeing in the gameplay in the background today, and that should just give you a pretty good indication of how much of the map you can see at any given time simply by glancing to the top left of your screen. Next, let's talk about those dots that appear on our minimap when enemies are firing unsuppressed guns. So this is the default when enemies aren't using suppressors or the equivalent attachments on, and they're not using the Echelon faction. When they fire their gun, if they're within your minimap radius, you will see a dot appear in the location that they're firing. And for a little more detail on that, if it's a solid dot, this means that that player will be on roughly the same elevation to you. Whereas if you see a hollow dot appear, this means they are on a different elevation, so they're either above you or below you. But it is worth noting the duration that this dot will appear for by default is 1 second. Although keep in mind, every single time a shot is fired, a new dot appears and overwrites the previous dot. So after that last shot is fired, then it will take a total of 1 second to disappear. And I wanted to just simulate that for you guys so you can see what that looks like on the minimap itself. And honestly, that's not a very long time at all. That fades away pretty quickly by default. Just for reference, for all you Call of Duty players out there, since I know that's most of you watching this video, by default, with no attachments in Modern Warfare 3, that dot, or diamond in that game, will appear for unsuppressed fire for a total of around 3 seconds, including the fade out time, because it does take a little time to fade out. But that's significantly longer than what we're seeing in XDefiant by default, and therefore, in this game, you have to be much more on the ball, paying attention to that minimap if you want to catch those enemy dots when they're firing unsuppressed weapons. In either case, one last little detail I want to point out is what happens if an enemy is firing an unsuppressed weapon and they're outside your minimap radius. Well, in that case, you just get this little red indicator on the edge of your minimap, and as far as I can tell, at least within these standard maps, this appears to have an infinite range to it, so even if somebody's on the complete opposite side of the map firing an unsuppressed weapon, you will get an indicator for them on the minimap, at least telling you the general direction that they're in. And that covers it for the default behavior when enemies aren't using any attachments like suppressors and they're not using the Echelon faction. Next, let's have a look at the light suppressor as well as the Recon barrel. These have the same impact on that dot that you produce for enemy players when firing your gun. And as far as I was able to tell, their effects don't stack at all, so it is redundant to be using both of these together. But with these, you can see in their description, using these attachments will first off reduce your minimap visibility range down to 24 meters, and the visibility duration will be cut down to 0.5 seconds. And let's have a look at that range first. Interestingly, that 24 meters is actually slightly larger than our base minimap coverage, so if you're not using Echelon and an enemy fires their gun between 22.5 and 24 meters, which is going to be quite rare, but if that situation occurs, you will still get that indicator on the edge of your minimap rather than a dot within your minimap radius. Whereas if they are within your minimap radius, then of course they will still be showing up as a dot, just like people firing a completely unsuppressed weapon. So it really doesn't have a super noticeable impact there, aside from the fact that enemies won't be able to spot the general direction that you're in if you're firing way outside their minimap radius. And also, it is worth noting for people using Echelon against you, since their minimap radius is larger than 24 meters, it is possible for you to be firing toward the edge of their minimap radius when using a light suppressor or recon barrel, and you won't show up as a dot for them as long as you're beyond 24 meters. So range-wise at least, I wouldn't say these attachments are going to have a massive impact here, simply because I would say the most valuable part of that enemy information on the minimap is the dot that's appearing within your minimap radius, And at least for standard players, if they're within your minimap radius using these attachments, you're still always going to be able to see that dot. In saying that though, there is the other element to cover here, and that is the dot duration, which is cut in half when using the light suppressor or recon barrel. And once again, here's just a quick simulation of what that looks like. And we can see that dot is not around for very long, and it would be very easy to miss that dot if you didn't glance up to that minimap in time. So I would say that characteristic of these attachments is the more powerful characteristic. It's super easy to miss that dot before it disappears. So when it comes to the light suppressor and recon barrel, I would say they're moderately effective as far as keeping you a little more hidden than firing a full-on unsuppressed weapon. However, we can always take this to the next level by using a full-on suppressor. It's just called the suppressor in the muzzle category. Or we can use the stealth barrel. Both of these will completely eliminate that dot from ever appearing when firing your gun. So you can be right next to an enemy player firing that gun. There will be no dot on their minimap at all. And therefore, not much of a breakdown is needed here. It literally just turns that dot off. However, I also want to point out a huge benefit to using Echelon is it will also give you that same benefit of never having a dot appear for firing a gun, even if you're not using any attachments on it at all. So you can use a completely non-suppressed gun, and as long as you're using that Echelon faction, you will never appear on the minimap for firing that gun. And what that means is if you are using the Echelon faction, you're kind of wasting an attachment if you're also using a suppressor. You really don't need to use a suppressor, whether that's a light suppressor or the full-on suppressor or the barrels that do the equivalent thing. At least when it comes to minimap behavior, that's totally redundant and you're wasting an attachment there. However, this does leave us with one last topic to discuss here when it comes to suppressors, and that is the fact that your audio signature is reduced when using suppressors. So enemies won't be able to hear your gun as loud, they won't be able to pinpoint your exact location as easily if you're using a suppressed weapon compared to a non-suppressed weapon. And therefore, in that case, I guess you could make an argument for still using a suppressor combined with Echelon, but at least in my opinion, there's just too much redundancies there, and I'd probably rather spend that attachment slot elsewhere. Now, when it comes to this audio signature, I really wish I could do some detailed testing on this and share that with you, but unfortunately, with the lack of private matches in the game currently, I don't have a controlled environment to test this in. And as a result, I can't do that testing that I'd love to do. I'd love to show the exact ranges and what it sounds like firing with a suppressed gun versus a light suppressed gun versus an unsuppressed gun, but that's just not viable in the game's current state. So you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. When using a suppressor, your audio signature will be reduced, at least to some degree, which can make it more difficult for enemies to pinpoint a location through audio. And there we go. That is gonna wrap it up for today's video, talking all about the minimap as well as suppressed versus non-suppressed weapons. And this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. What do you guys think about all this information? How do you feel about the fact that Echelon gets that additional bonus of having a larger minimap radius? Also, what are your thoughts on the fact that our default dot duration is just 1 second, which is extremely fast compared to something like Call of Duty? And do you think it's worth it to use something like a light suppressor or the recon barrel? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.